Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Coming up on Arirang News. President Yoon said South Korea will promote freedom, peace, and prosperity around the world. His remarks come during a ceremony marking the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement after greeting war veterans. A massive military parade is likely to be held by North Korea tonight to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the armistice that ended fighting in the Korean War, or what it calls Victory Day. The government has unveiled tax code revisions for this year, aimed at boosting the economy with more tax incentives for firms, well-being for the people, and hopes for an increase in the birth rate. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with President Yoon Suk-yeol's remarks greeting Korean War veterans from around the world. South Korea will stand up for freedom, peace, and prosperity in the world based on the dedication of the United Nations forces who fought for the country's freedom. That's what President Yoon said at a ceremony held on Thursday, marking the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement, which ended active fighting in the 1950-53 war and also coinciding with UN Forces Participation Day. At the Busan Cinema Center, which was a military airfield during the war, Yoon personally greeted 62 surviving veterans representing some 22 countries that fought alongside South Korea in the 1950-53 war as part of the UN command. He said the South will never forget the sacrifices and the bloodshed by UN allies and will stand alongside other liberal democracies based on the ironclad ROK-US alliance. Earlier in the day, the President and First Lady Kim Gun-hee paid their respects at the United Nations Memorial Cemetery in Busan, the only UN cemetery in the world where more than 2,300 lie at rest. And on this day, exactly 70 years ago, the 3-year-long Korean War ended in an armistice agreement. This occasion has brought foreign war veterans who fought to defend the South back to this country for an event in the southern city of Busan, a symbolic place. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung covers that emotional event.
93-year-old British veteran Colin Thackeray passionately sings the Korean traditional folk song Arirang. Thackeray is among the 64 Korean War veterans currently in South Korea to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement. He was invited to sing the song at the thank you banquet in Busan on Wednesday evening, recalling the times he had done with his comrades during the war. The Minister of Patriots and Veterans Affairs also showed appreciation for their sacrifice and contributions to the development of South Korea.
The solidarity brought together 16 nations that sent their combat troops, 6 nations that provided medical support, and 38 nations that sent materials to Korea. These countries gave us the greatest victory and forces that led to the successful post-war reconstruction of our country.
U.S. Korean War veteran William Word said he's been thanked many times, but all the honor should go to the Korean people.
When I went home, my home was still standing. My family was complete. But when survival came along, the people of Korea rebuild their nation, their homes, their cities, their families, and their lives.
South Korea also hosted the 2023 Ministerial Summit on Veterans Affairs, which was attended by government delegations from 22 countries who supported South Korea during the Korean War. Luxembourg's Prime Minister Xavier Bettel said no matter how far away Luxembourg is from South Korea, solidarity and support are what matter when fighting for values and democracy.
But we know how important it is to fight for democracies. The fight for values has no borders, and you find everywhere partners to fight when it's time to defend democracy.
Minister Park proposed a joint declaration to reaffirm the values of freedom defended by the 22 nations 70 years ago, as well as joint efforts toward achieving world peace. South Korea also held bilateral discussions with Australia, France, Luxembourg, and Turkey to further solidify the friendships established during the Korean War. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News, Busan.
Meanwhile, across the border in the north, Pyongyang is preparing its own celebrations for the day it claims as Victory Day. With delegations from China and Russia present, a large-scale military parade could be part of the celebrations. Our unification correspondent Lee Dae-yeon has more.
North Korea is expected to hold a military parade on Thursday night, marking the 70th anniversary of the armistice that ended fighting in the Korean War. Pyongyang calls this Victory Day, and the event will likely take place at Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang. The exact time is unknown, same too as to whether the North's leader Kim Jong-un will deliver a speech. The North, though, has rehearsed for months for this day as it sees the truce as a victory in what it calls the, quote, Grand Fatherland Liberation War. Some observers say Pyongyang will likely unveil intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and tactical nuclear weapons. North Korea has this week invited delegations from Russia and China. Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu earlier accompanied the North Korean leader to a defense exhibition that displayed intercontinental ballistic missiles such as the Hwasong-18 and Hwasong-17. The Korean Central News Agency reported Thursday that Kim and Shoigu talked about the latest weaponry and some of the strategic ways to develop them. Pyongyang and Moscow's defense ministers also held talks which Shoigu assured will be helpful for bilateral military ties. Following this, South Korea's foreign ministry says it hopes that talks came to a peaceful conclusion.
As Russia also stands for denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, we hope that the visit can lead to the ceasing of provocations from the north and its return to denuclearization talks.
A Chinese delegation led by Lee Hong-sung, China's vice chairperson of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, also arrived in Pyongyang on Wednesday. Lee delivered Chinese President Xi Jinping's letter to Kim, who responded with gratitude towards Xi, who prioritizes a close relationship with North Korea. Kim and the delegation members of the two countries attended a celebratory performance on Wednesday, showing off their trilateral alliance and as a response to strengthened ties between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
Some changes were announced today to Korea's tax code to boost the economy through giving more tax incentives. One of the main goals is to raise the global competitiveness of the nation's key industries. Boosting the competitiveness of South Korean companies for stronger economic growth and helping people's livelihoods. This is what the country's latest revision to the tax code published on Thursday mainly aims to do, as well as prepare for the future.
This year's tax revision has put emphasis on providing strong support for South Korean firms to better compete in the global market, including those in the Korean content industries and national strategic technology.
One of the highlights would be sharply raising tax relief for Korean content makers so that more K-dramas, movies, and reality shows can be brought to the world. After the change, for expenses spent on content production, the government will grant up to 15% of tax credits for conglomerates, 20% for strong medium-sized firms, and 30% for small and mid-sized companies. The tax code revision also aims to provide higher tax relief for firms investing in the semiconductor industry and other strategic sectors that'll drive growth for the country, known as the K-CHIPS Act. Tax credits for conglomerates investing in chip facilities will be up to 25%, and small and medium companies will be getting up to 35%. Also, there would be greater tax benefits for companies returning to the country from offshore operations by providing them 100% of income and corporate tax cuts for the first 7 years and 50% in the following 3 years. Another major part would be reducing the tax burden for small and mid-sized family businesses when it comes to inheriting them by putting more companies into the lowest tax bracket of 10%. The term for payment will also be dramatically extended from the current 5 years to 20. With all the changes, the government says the tax code revision will result in a roughly $390 million drop in tax revenue. But the finance minister explained, although it is a difficult time, the tax incentives were allocated to much-needed areas, including prompting corporate investment and child subsidies. The tax code revisions also seeks to enhance the well-being of the people as well as future generations through more tax incentives. Our Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
South Korea's revision to the tax code this year includes measures aimed at boosting the local economy. The latest tax revision published on Thursday by the Finance Ministry seeks to expand tax benefits not just for newlyweds but also for the lower and middle classes.
We plan to increase support for the lower and middle classes to help the private economy recover quickly and to actively address structural issues such as the population decline.
The most highly anticipated tax revision was arguably the tax exemption on funds gifted by parents to their children when they get married. The government has decided to expand the threshold from $39,000 to around $117,000 for inheritances given by parents to their children 2 years before or after the date of their marriage registration. In a more direct move to help boost birth rates, the government will also increase payments provided to families from around $620 to around $780 per child. The income limit for families eligible was also raised from around $31,000 to nearly $55,000. In addition, taxpayers can qualify for tax credit rates that amount to 15% of medical expenses that exceeded 3% of their total income. The tax credit limit of around $5,500, however, will no longer apply to children under the age of 6 starting next year. It's also not just people that are benefiting.
VAT exemptions will be applied to more than 100 types of pet medical expenses starting October this year.
The government is also looking to improve people's livelihoods. It will raise income tax deduction rates by 10 percentage points for credit card expenditure between April and December next year at traditional markets and on recreational activities. The 2023 tax reform bill, which will be submitted to the National Assembly in September, is expected to go into effect next year. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
In the U.S., the Federal Reserve has hiked its benchmark interest rate by a quarter point to a 22-year high, continuing its fight for inflation. Yoon has more.
On Wednesday, the U.S. Federal Reserve raised its key interest rates by 25 basis points, putting its lending rate in the 5.25% to 5.5% range. The borrowing rate in the U.S. has now reached its highest level since 2001. The rate hike comes after a rate freeze in the previous Federal Open Market Committee meeting, and despite consumer price increases slowing down. Consumer prices increased just 3% on year in June, marking the lowest annual inflation rate in more than 2 years. But assessing it to still be too high, the U.S. Fed is looking to bring the rate further down to its target of 2%. When asked if a further rate hike is possible at the next FOMC meeting slated for September, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said such a move is not out of the question.
It is certainly possible that we would raise funds again at the September meeting if the data warranted. And I would also say it's possible that we would choose to hold steady at that meeting.
Powell acknowledged that the economy has proved to be surprisingly resilient despite the Fed's rapid rate hikes. Though inflation has reached its slowest pace in 2 years, the economy is still growing too fast for inflation to fall back to the Fed's 2% target, as consumer confidence is at its highest level in 2 years. Americans keep spending and businesses keep adding jobs. Powell added that it's too early to tell when the U.S. central bank can start cutting its rates, but also revealed that the Fed's staff economists no longer foresee a recession. Some economists think the Fed might decide to forego a rate increase in September before weighing a possible hike in November. 이은진, Arirang News.
And with the Fed's rate hike, the gap between South Korea and the U.S. has widened further to the largest ever. Our Moon Hye-ryun explains how this can impact the Bank of Korea's rate decisions down the road.
With the Fed's latest decision to hike the key interest rate by 25 basis points, the difference in key interest rates between South Korea and the United States has reached an all-time high. The FOMC announced Thursday that it had lifted its interest rate to the 5.25 to 5.5% range, bringing the gap between it and the Bank of Korea's rate of 3.5% to 2 percentage points. This is the first time in history that the rate difference between the allies has reached the 2 percentage point mark, prompting concerns over the impact this could have on the South Korean won-US dollar exchange rate and sparking interest in the Korean Central Bank's response. The won has been losing ground against the greenback, closing below the 1,300 $1 rate at 1,275 won on Wednesday as a result of sluggish IT exports and the country logging a trade deficit once again in July. An increase in interest rates by major economies like the United States often leads to a devaluation of other currencies such as the Korean won, as investors are drawn towards more profitable investment prospects. The BOK has kept its benchmark rate at 3.5% for nearly half a year now, with its latest decision 2 weeks ago to maintain the rate for the 5th month in a row. Speaking at a central bank meeting on Thursday, Deputy Chief Lee Seung-un remarked that there is still a long way to go until inflation recovers to 2% and that further monetary tightening may be necessary despite the consumer price index slowing to the 2% range in June for the first time in 21 months. The central bank had previously announced that rate hikes to 3.75% may be possible amid inflation uncertainty, with its inflation forecast for July announced on Wednesday at 3.3%. He also said the central bank will closely monitor related market conditions by watching out for increased volatility in domestic and foreign financial markets due to changes in policy expectations. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho, also speaking on Thursday, said the government has plans to stabilize the domestic market.
The government will continue to strengthen resilience against external factors by bolstering the current account balance and other economic fundamentals, ensuring that South Korea's financial and foreign exchange markets are stable.
Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
Korea's export and import values and terms of trade all experienced a turnaround in June. According to the Bank of Korea on this Thursday, the export value index for last month rose 7.5% on year amid greater outbound shipments of chemical products. The value of imports also grew 4.4%, driven by computers and electronic devices. These favorable figures are the first in 4 months. And based on these findings, Korea's net barter terms of trade gained 0.2%, marking an upswing after 27 months. Terms of trade measure the amount a country can buy in imports for each unit it exports. Lawmakers in Korea today passed a Rivers Act revision responding to the recent catastrophic flooding and landslides following unusually heavy monsoon rains. This will allow money from state coffers to be used for flood prevention measures. Kim Jong-sil reports.
I declare that the amendment has been passed.
A revision to the Rivers Act intended to support the implementation of anti-flooding measures was passed by the National Assembly with 249 votes in favor out of the 250 lawmakers present. The bill was passed in a plenary session with an overwhelming approval rate regardless of political party. The swift decision came about 2 weeks after catastrophic flooding and landslides in central South Korea took nearly 50 lives and ruined people's homes and livelihoods. At least 14 people died when a river burst its banks due to heavy rain and flooded an underpass in Osong in a matter of minutes. Until now, local governments were responsible for these regional rivers and they experienced budgetary problems for maintenance and repair. The amendment allows the state to provide financial support for the maintenance of designated regional rivers currently conducted by local governments whose water levels may change due to potential flooding downstream by rivers maintained by the state. The Assembly also passed revisions to water system management and support for residents near the Keumgang, Nakdonggang, Yeongsangang, and Seomjingang rivers. With the revision setting the legal framework for water-related disasters such as droughts and floods, these residents can use the water system management budget for disaster prevention measures. The revised laws will be enacted as soon as the government publishes it. The legislation for the Anti-Flooding Act in urban areas, on the other hand, was not discussed at Thursday's plenary session. The main part of the act is to establish a National Countermeasures Committee under the Environment Minister and to systematically promote urban flood prevention plans with other related ministries. The National Assembly Legislation and Judiciary Committee said since it's a legislative action, more discussion is needed, but it also added that the goal is to process the legislation at next month's plenary session. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
The Busan World Disability Conference 2023 will open on August 7th with the goal of enhancing global cooperation and communication for those with disabilities and in pursuit of a barrier-free city. Hosted by the Busan Metropolitan Government and Disabled People's International Korea, the 5-day conference will be participated in by over 2,000 people from 80 countries, including NGOs and policymakers. The venue for the conference, Bexco, will also offer virtual reality participation where people can join forums, enjoy artwork, and communicate with other participants through the metaverse. Busan is seeking to reinvent itself as a leading city, creating a better environment for those with disabilities under the theme Global Transformational Agenda, Current Challenges and Opportunities.
Baking hot conditions will once again be sweeping across South Korea. Readings will exceed the seasonal average by about 3 degrees for most regions. Seoul will be hiking up to 33 degrees Celsius, while other regions like Gyeongju will be reaching 36 degrees. With high humidity levels, temperatures will feel hotter than the actual readings. And due to unstable atmospheric conditions, occasional showers are expected for the daytime. Most regions will see around 5 to 40 millimeters. Although the amount of rainfall is fairly trivial, thunder and lightning may follow at times. Make sure to have your umbrellas handy. Morning temperatures will be 1 to 3 degrees higher than today's. Seoul will start off at 26 degrees. And most regions will see showers for the daytime. Highs in Seoul will reach 33, Daejeon and Chuncheon 34, Daegu will be topping out at 35 degrees. For the remainder of the week, maximum temperatures will hover around 33 to 34 degrees. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for tonight's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with the most up-to-date news. Good night.